Sir, the Prime Minister is set to publish the government's roadmap to reopening later today. And within that, it's widely expected that he will announce schools will reopen on March 8th. And then it will be a long road with 4 key criteria to reopening the rest of the economy. What do you think of the government's reopening policy?
Well, first to do with schools, it's right that schools should be prioritised above the rest of the economy, because we've got to put the health and welfare of our children and young people first. They're the future, and without supporting them first, I don't think we can unlock the economy and society. I'm slightly worried that there's hints that all schools were open all together at the same time. That might be unwise. Liberal Democrats have been arguing for a phased reopening, so we can take a cautious approach to reopening, because whether it's schools or the wider economy, literally the worst thing that could happen is that there might be another lockdown because the reopening happens too fast. I think caution is essential. And if we're going to get that confidence coming back, that's going to be so essential to people's lives and to businesses in the future, we can't go back again. I think if there was a 4th lockdown because the Prime Minister gets it wrong again, then that would be a disaster for our schools and our businesses. So Liberal Democrats are saying, yes, of course we welcome reopening. Everybody wants to get the economy back, but let's do it in a way that prevents and avoids a 4th lockdown, which would be truly damaging.
Now, the UK has received a lot of praise for its vaccination rollout, which is considered to be pretty successful relative to other advanced economies. Do you think that the government deserves credit for the success of this vaccination rollout?
Well, you're right. The vaccination program in the UK has been a big success, and let's hope it continues to be so. And there's a lot of people that deserve credit. I think the National Health Service has come into its own because actually it's been run by the GPs at the local level, and the GPs know their patients, they know their communities, and they've done a fantastic job. And we've seen the scientists, we've seen the local councils, we've seen volunteers, we've seen so many people across our society get engaged. So, of course, I think government and indeed parties across Parliament deserve some success by getting behind this vaccination programme. But the real champions, the real heroes are those GPs, those local authorities, those local volunteers who've delivered, a very good programme. And I mean, I have to be frank with you. The vaccination programme has been a huge success, and we're very proud of that in the United Kingdom. But the way we've handled the pandemic, particularly Boris Johnson and his government, that's not been so good. And we've got one of the worst death rates in the world, I'm sorry to tell you. And a number of very poor decisions have been made by Boris Johnson and his ministers, which have led to one of the worst outcomes in terms of the numbers of people who have died by head of population. And I've called for an independent public inquiry. Liberal Democrats are the ones championing the case, because I've talked to the bereaved families, I've talked to people who've lost their businesses, and they're saying this didn't have to be so bad. We didn't have to have so many deaths. Our growth didn't have to be hit so badly because the government could have done better, could have followed other governments around the world who've handled the pandemic much better.
No, indeed, the stats are pretty stark. But I want to turn to the government's response to what happened last year, and particularly the economic response and the sheer amount of support that was handed out. I mean, it looks as though if we keep tracking these numbers, the government deficit numbers are going to tally around 17% of GDP. We know that debt is now larger as a percentage of the economy than the economy size. So debt to GDP ratio is above 100%. Is this all a price that is worth paying, or do you worry about the state of the British public finances in the future?
Well, it's certainly a price worth paying if we keep people in jobs and keep the society going. It would have been devastating if we'd ended up in a downward cycle and we'd seen even more unemployment. It's bad enough as it is. It's bad enough to see the business closing. But if even more would close, it would have been a disaster. So Liberal Democrats have always argued, and indeed think the government should have done more to support businesses at this very, very difficult time. Now, the national debt is an issue. Yes, of course it is. No responsible politician could look at that debt and say it isn't an issue. The question, though, is do we think there needs to be really rapid action to deal with it, or can we deal with it over time? And my response is that this is something we can deal with over time. And the best way to deal with it is to get back to growth strategies. If we can get that green growth, particularly that green sustainable growth, and move our economy particularly to a green economic recovery that can deal with climate change as well as the jobs problems, then I think that debt problem will over time just melt away. We've seen that in the history of the UK and other countries in the past. When they've had good, strong, sustainable growth, then the debt hasn't worried them. So as long as we get those growth policies, and Liberal Democrats have got some very ambitious growth plans, particularly with small business and green industries for the future, then I think we shouldn't worry about the debt too much.